So, hello and welcome back to Talking Conservation. We're glad that you've joined us today. Now, today is a slightly different episode. What we're going to do is we're going to reflect on what's been going on this past year since we've started. So this episode is going to be a reflection on what we've been doing on Talking Conservation, and we've been going a year now, so we're going to reflect on that. But we're also going to be talking about some of the things that Rich has been involved in and I've been involved in, as well as looking to the future and making some announcements about some plans we've got. So sit back and enjoy this episode. So, Rich, our anniversary. Happy anniversary to you.
Yeah, happy anniversary to you too. Because when we set out on this embarkation on this new kind of venture together 12 months ago, I'm not entirely sure we expected, I suppose to do 30 episodes in now, aren't we, in terms of what's on the podcast itself, and a whole bunch of other stuff that you and I have been working on in the background, which all goes into supporting Talking Conservation, which is probably what we want to cover in this episode, really.
Yeah. Did you expect it to be as it has, as we found it? Or, I mean, I don't think we had any real expectations for it, did we?
We didn't really. And I think what's been delightful is the feedback, not just online from people that have commented and said this is a really great video or whatever else, or really helpful, but actually out and about when we've gone and met other people and saying, I listened to your podcast and actually I really like the episode on such. So, did you? That's very nice. Yes, it's nice to hear, isn't it? Thank you.
It's been good. We've got something like nigh on 2,900 subscribers. So first of all, we'd like to thank you for subscribing. That's great. Tell us a little bit more about what we're going to talk about in this episode then.
So Stephen and I have both got our own separate businesses to which we've been doing. And actually, Stephen's got some very exciting stuff that he's going to announce to people on here in terms of some training he's just launched. But I think one of the bits we want to just talk about, which we touch on each episode, is our respective businesses that are all involved in conservation that can help the listener, the homeowner, the professional. And so we're going to touch a bit on what each of us have been up to on those businesses, but then also actually what we've got planned for the future, both involving those businesses and also the rest of Talking Conservation with a practical day that people might want to be involved in as well.
Let's first of all talk about your business. Now, you've called it Expertible. So I think the first thing you need to do is explain the name. But what's been happening on the platform? What's it all about?
So Expertible, including the title really, it's an expert platform essentially. It's where, not me, because I'm not an expert, but a whole bunch of people like Stephen and a bunch of his other colleagues, where you can ask one-on-one individual questions of someone on your role building. And the difference with this particular platform is that it's a very clear transactional process in terms of I have a piece of advice I need from an expert and you pay to have a video call with this particular expert. They're not upselling their own services, they're not allowed to, or any products. So you can be guaranteed that advice you're getting is completely impartial, which I think is culturally very different to how we've tried to receive advice or tried to gain advice in the past, which is where you go online, you do a search, you go on a website, but that particular website, the whole premise of that website is to sell their services or to sell their products. And it's like, well, we want to get away from that. We want to get away from trying to get advice for free. I personally think you should pay for advice because you've been guaranteed, you're getting that person's advice on your particular bespoke solution, not just something that, I happen to sell this, so that's your solution. Anyway, that's what Expertible is all about. And in the past, we've been... Sorry, go on, Stephen.
Well, I was going to say, what sort of feedback have you had from homeowners or those using the platform about what you're providing? Has it done what you've intended it to do?
So the simple answer is it absolutely has, and then some. I mean, whilst it's a different culture for people getting used to, which is paying for advice from an expert, and therefore that has been admittedly challenging for people to sort of say, why would I pay for this when I can get it for free from Google or from an AI source? And I'd love to go into more detail about why that's so biased and why that isn't a particularly good option to go down. But the feedback from every single person that's used the platform has been unanimously, this is exactly what I needed. I had a dedicated expert that was like having my uncle who's a builder or my auntie who happened to be a heritage surveyor helping me. They're on their side. There's not this adversarial kind of like, oh, well, sucking through teeth, you should do this, or here, buy my service. And it's just been, the response is phenomenal, and the testimonials we get are really great, which is lovely to hear. So just trying to build on that, really.
So bookings are going well, and what sort of features or developments can you see going forward?
So bookings are every month are increasing. We're still in the sort of low numbers, and that's all down to, quite frankly, the amount of marketing time I've got to develop to explaining to people what the platform's all about and helping. What's incredibly helpful is those people that have used the platforms are becoming our advocates. They're sort of saying, yes, this is what's helped me, and so that's really useful. In terms of features that we're developing, there's a lot of technical challenges with both matching up the expert's own diary with then recording a video call, allowing the clients and customers to upload documentation and videos and floor plans and things beforehand, and then have a chat network with the expert before you even get on the call. And then you watch the video call recording afterwards. It's all recorded and you can watch on platform. So it's been a lot of behind the scenes development of that software development process, which I'm not a tech in that respect. I love the science side of things, but when it comes to coding, not my bag at all. So that's been, hell of a challenge for me. So in terms of new features that we're developing for the platform itself, they're primarily looked at supporting the experts we've got on the platform and the onboarding of those. So both inviting the right caliber of expert, taking them through the onboarding process, and also making it easier for them to manage their own diaries, to ultimately create a much better system and service for the clients and customers that need some support with their house. There's a number of areas that we're working on with regard to damp mold, retrofit, different types of surface repair materials, and also the regulatory side of things with conservation officers that you can speak to, just to kind of make that much more seamless with regard to making sure you can find the right expert that can help with your particular challenge. And so that's sort of all the stuff we're doing in the past. So, and of course then telling the world about this is an option that you might be available to people.
So if people want to contact you or what have you, they simply search for Expertible. So it's expert, IBLE, www.expertible.com, isn't it?
Yep, that works. So stick Expertible into Google, and that will always find us as well. Or we can go on social media, so on Instagram or on Facebook. We've got presence on there as well. And there is a chat messaging functionality both on the website and within other social media things that can come through to one of the team that can help triage the chat. If you're not sure who to book, you can chat message us and we can sort of say, oh, in this problem, I would suggest you book with Stephen or book with whoever that can support you with that. So that's the plan for the future. But Stephen, I think we need to get on to now what you've been up to, sir, because you've been a busy boy, haven't you, when it comes to sort of doing more videos, like with your vast experience of doing conservation surveying. So do tell us what you've been up to.
I won't bore you with all the background details, but when I retired from full-time surveying, I was encouraged to go into training other professionals and imparting some of my knowledge over the years to others. And so I've been thinking about ways of doing that. And I've partnered up with an old friend of mine, Ian Bullock, who runs a firm of surveyors in the Midlands, carpenter surveyors. So we were in discussion, and what we realised is what there isn't available for the professional is basic conservation type training, and not just for listed buildings, but all older buildings, old historic traditional type buildings. And there's nothing really out there for the practitioner, because you either have to go to the extent of doing a master's degree or something like that and actually getting a formal qualification, or just doing your own reading in your spare time or whatever. So what we tried to develop was something that was flexible and online so that people could do it in their own home at their own time. And therefore they were in charge of how they were learning, but it would provide CPD, which all professionals have to do anyway. So it ticks several boxes in that sense. And we've called it, bit tongue-in-cheek, but we've called it BEST training. So you may think that's a bit cheeky, isn't it? BEST training. What it is BE for Boniface Enterprises, and then survey training. So it's BE survey training BEST. There you go. Nice and easy.
Makes sense. And there's definitely a need for this. I mean, we get multiple people asking us questions on Expertible and me privately about sort of saying, where can I find a surveyor that has an understanding or at least a basic premise on how my old building works? Because we all know, as we talk about lots on this channel, old buildings are not the same as modern buildings. And you go to your average high street surveyor, potentially they may not know about how old buildings work. And so I think this sort of CPD training is crucial. So how does it actually work then, Stephen? So what do people get from this? How does it work?
You get a lot of people that say, I don't necessarily have the time or the money to become an out-and-out expert. And whilst we do have accreditation schemes for conservation, those people on those schemes generally deal with projects, not necessarily defect analysis or pre-purchase inspections or anything like that. And some of them deal with very high level stuff and not necessarily residential properties. So when I see on social media people say, oh, find an accredited professional, I'm thinking, actually, you probably won't, because there aren't any that suit what you are looking for. And that's where the problem arises, because it becomes difficult to identify the right person. So what we're trying to do is to provide that basic training to be able to say that these people have enough sufficient knowledge to be competent to advise to a certain level within the world of conservation, and so therefore can undertake some defect analysis, pre-purchase inspections and things like that. So that's the sort of people we're looking for, that initial stages. Now, some of them may progress on and become out and out experts and become accredited, but they start at that point. And that will then feed into the market in that we can then say to the public, there are these people that have gone through this training that you can go to. And hopefully in future, we're going to create some sort of method, maybe a register, something like that, whereby the public can find these professionals and have some assurance that they've gone through a basic set of training.
Sounds great, Stephen, and I can absolutely see the gap it fills, but you haven't told me about actually how it works. So how does someone get involved then? How does it actually work?
Okay, so yeah, sorry, I forgot that bit. So if you know of a professional, if you are a professional that wants more training in conservation and dealing with old buildings, or you're short on your CPD, you're coming up to the end of the year and you think, I need more CPD, and you think that's a good way of getting it. What you do is you head towards our website, our webpage, which is www.thebesttraining.co.uk. So again, we're being very cheeky with the naming of it, but it's www.thebesttraining.co.uk. So yeah, if anyone heads towards that site, what you'll find there is an overview of what the course involves. Now, at the moment, we've just developed Module 1, which focuses on inspecting buildings, so the pre-purchase type inspection. We've got plans for quite a few modules to come thereafter that dig deeper into certain subjects. So we've got various different things planned so that people who want to develop further can take these further modules. It's excellent value for money, because at the moment we've got over 10, I think it's over 14 hours of CPD up there, and it's with VAT, it's 300 quid. Well, you're not going to get that anywhere else, not for 300 quid. If you're paying for it, that is, it's really good value for money. Now, future modules will be an added cost, because we are planning on guest speakers as well, guest interviews and people to speak on their specific specialist subject. So that's what's planned. That's what I'm involved in. It's really exciting. We are planning some webinars which will be recorded and will become part of the scheme. Members who join up, sign up and pay up also become part of the Heritage Conservation Community, which is a subscription community that I created a couple of years ago, and it's been going a year and a half or so. And on there is a discussion forum and a lot more content and so on and so forth. So the next thing we want to talk about is what we've got for you our listeners, what we are planning, what we'd like to do for you, our listeners. So this is where, if you like, the talking stops and the doing or the practical side takes over. So, Rich, tell us how this came about and what research you've done and what we're talking about here.
So what we're talking about here is essentially a practical day for you, our listener. And the idea being that it's where the kind of talking stops and things that you can't really do on a video or by audio, so that you can actually get really hands-on with the tools of the trade to understand a bit more about how to put a lime skim coat on, and just to give you a general understanding of the practical building materials that go into all the stuff we're talking about with conservation. Now, I come from a background where I've got a lot of practical experience with doing this stuff as a DIYer on my own home. Stephen, of course, comes from this as a practical experience of seeing when people have not got this quite so right and inspecting their buildings kind of thing. So the idea being that it's really a good opportunity for people to get together in a kind of safe environment with a whole bunch of other practitioners and experts to say, here's all the things just to give an idea in terms of whether or not you think it is a viable option to go and try and lime plaster your own wall, or it is a viable option to have a go at repairing a bit of stone masonry, all those sort of things. Now, I think when we first kicked this off and we described as a concept, we had a really interesting response from people sort of saying, yep, sounds great. Now, yep, sounds great is very different to actually people physically signing up on the day. So in order to get the correct material that people really truly want on this, we put out a survey. Now, this is going back a couple of months now. We did a quick Google survey and we've had just under 130 people respond to that survey, which has been fantastic. Generally going through the sort of things they would like to see, how far they'd be willing to travel, what they would roughly want to, the limits they would want to pay for a course. And we've got a whole bunch of statistics that Steve and I are going to go and put a wet towel over our head and actually run through it in terms of, okay, what are people looking for from a day such as this, or even 2 days, that they can really get a maximum amount of benefit from? Because there is a number of courses that are already out there that do things for, whether it's homeowners, for practitioners, but we do believe there is something missing, and our survey results have absolutely demonstrated there is something missing from those other offerings already out there. So that's the plan, really.
Can you share any of the sort of breakdown to indicate to us what sort of people are saying?
So we had some really useful indications on the demographics. So we're talking ballpark here between 30 and 70 years old. And actually the roughly half of the respondents were in the sort of southern half of the country, which is to be expected, if you like, I suppose. And also the general areas of where people live. Just under half live in a detached house. 44% live in a semi-detached or terraced house. And all this helps us form the picture of the sort of buildings that most people are going to work on. One of the really interesting things is, how long have you lived in this home? And actually only 17% of all the respondents have lived in it less than a year. So this is mostly for people that have already been in that property for at least a year and are probably likely to do things themselves. And again, 57.4% of people that have already done some repairs or done some DIY, but only 25% of total beginner. Everyone else has done something. So only 3/4 of our audience that have responded to this survey have already got a reasonable level of having to do some work to their property. So that's, again, helping us gear towards really what's going to be useful.
Well, I was just thinking that there might be people listening that said, "Oh, I haven't seen that survey. Where can they still respond to it? And are you going to do any deeper dive into any of the information?"
So the survey is still open, and we'll put a link actually in the show notes here, so you can still keep adding to it if you would like to. And what we're also doing on the back of the survey, for those that would like to be kept informed, which actually the vast majority of people that responded so far have added your email address. And the idea being that we're going to then refine this down even further when it comes to some of the practical things. So for example, if we had the opportunity to go and see someone how thatch is made or how thatch is done on this particular day, how many people would that interest? What about doing some lime plastering? What about doing some stonework? So we can really get a rich picture of what are the things that are absolutely critical that we need to cover and what are the nice to haves. And then we can actually really hone it down to what you, as our audience, would like to actually turn up and see on the day.
And have we got a time scale, any potential venue? Where, when, what have you? Can you tell us anything of that?
Timescale, we are aiming for around kind of late summer, autumn next year, so 2026. And there's a huge amount of work that's got to go into, of course, in terms of devising that. Location is still to be determined. We've got a couple of recce's that we're going ahead with. Actually, Stephen and I are on a recce in 2 weeks' time to one particular venue to see whether that's going to be suitable. And there's a bunch of others that we might well be looking at. So we'll pass you on with more information as we get to it. And I think we will potentially be setting up, for those that are interested in coming to this, that have responded to the survey, we might start an infrequent newsletter about sort of saying, this is where we're at the moment, just to kind of drum up an understanding of, you can then decide, actually, this is not going to be anything like what I want, or actually, yes, this is really interesting, because that's going to really help us to understand and formulate it for precisely our audience and that we're trying to help here.
So that's great. That's really fantastic, Rich. We look forward to hearing more about that, and we look forward to seeing your responses so that we can plan this day so it offers really great value for money and offers what you, our listeners and viewers, want from us. So that'd be great. Thank you very much.
Speaking of what you want from us, I think the next thing that we wanted to cover on this episode is about the different themes and the guests we've got for future episodes. We've had some really great feedback from people that are on here in terms of this particular episode was really useful, this was less so, or actually these are the kind of things that we'd like. So, Stephen, do let our listeners know then, what can they expect in the pipeline of the podcast going forward?
The first thing, Rich and I have been talking for some time about the possibility of doing a short series about planning. And we've been thinking how best to deal with it. But it so happens that I was talking to someone I know who is a planner, but also a legal expert and so on and so forth. And so what we're shaping up to do at the moment is a short series of 3 episodes whereby we perhaps look at some myth busting to start with. Then we look at planning generally and what makes a good application and how to deal with that side of it. And then what about when things go wrong? How do we avoid getting into trouble? Or if something's been done to the property that isn't quite right, how do we get ourselves out of trouble? So we're going to be looking at that. So that's one short series, and we might then develop that further in talking to other people about the processes and their experience in future. But we want to try and make sure that it's practical so that our listeners and viewers get a very good practical guide on planning and the legal aspects of dealing with older and listed buildings.
Sounds good. And what we've also got planned is, so I would imagine many of you looked at our Lime series that we did, where we essentially started from what is lime and we built it up with the lime cycle into the different types of limes that you can get into the building mortars and building materials and plasters, and also where you apply those materials, whether it's on walls, whether it's on ceilings, the decorative ceilings. We went through a whole series on lime. And actually, we've had some really good responses and feedback on those in terms of it's great to take it from that kind of cradle to grave in terms of the life cycle of lime, in terms of how its uses. The next series we're considering doing, that we've got some people to talk to and planning on, is all about timber. So timber, again, is such a intrinsic material in terms of all of our vernacular buildings and all of our old buildings, where it's used in such a broad variety, both from the structure of building the buildings, but also the decorative side of the architraves and all the various other bits. So there's lots and lots to cover in that, and we've got various different people we've got lined up to talk to timber in terms of both timber framing and how you build the buildings, but also the issues, the defects, the timber decay, all those sort of things, which I think you would find really interesting. Again, stripping back all the commercial aspects to it, and about whether it's to do with trying to sell you stuff, and that's not what we're interested in doing. It's more just understanding timber, what its purpose is, and how it can go wrong, and what you can do to fix it. That's the next series that we're planning on launching.
Well, that sounds great. Now, if people think, well, that's great, I'd like to listen to that or watch those episodes, the important thing here is if you subscribe, then you're going to be notified about these as and when they come up. So subscribe and hit that little bell icon, and then you will be notified when we release new episodes. Now, the one thing you've probably discovered is that we're not necessarily regular. We do, at the moment, we're producing these ourselves, editing them ourselves. And so they are a little bit irregular. And sometimes we get them out once a week. Sometimes it's once every few weeks or once a month. So bear with us. But if you subscribe, you will always be notified when a new episode comes out. We really appreciate your responses, and you've heard what we're planning and what we've got in mind. But what we'd really like to know is what you would want from us. What have you enjoyed so far? What sort of topics have you thought, I've really learnt something from that, or I found that really interesting? What sort of guests do you think you'd like to listen to in future? What interviews or what other subject matters do you think you'd like to see us explore in more detail? Am I expressing that the right way, Rich? Do you think? Is that, yeah?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, we want to make this as useful as possible for those that both have an old building that want to look after themselves, but also for the kind of professionals that want to get into this. So it's got to be audience guided. And so please, also, if you think we've got something wrong, we want to make sure we're giving out the right information on this channel. So if we've got something fundamentally wrong or something you fundamentally disagree with, please do get in touch, because we're not professing that we are the oracle in all things to do with conservation. And therefore, if we have got something wrong, let's have a discussion. Let's find that source material and let's really share it with everyone so that we can all learn and all sort of adapt together.
I think that's vitally important. I think most of us learn best when we actually do make mistakes, because that's when you learn quicker quite often. And sometimes we don't always agree. I don't think we've yet found a major disagreement between the two of us, but there may be things that we don't agree on, or people don't agree with our guests, etc. And I think that's okay as well. We can disagree, but as in another podcast I listen to, they often say we can disagree agreeably. And I think that's the important thing here, that we need to retain a respectful attitude even when we disagree with each other.
Very much so. I think that's pretty much all we wanted to cover in this particular episode. We've covered both what Stephen has been up to in the background. I'm very busy on creating some really useful training for surveyors. We've covered what I've been in the background, some useful information on how we can help homeowners individually on their particular property by speaking one-on-one with various experts. And we've also covered about some of the things that we're to expect on a day that we're looking at putting together, a practical day that you can be involved in as an audience, and also what episodes that we're going to be covering in the future on this podcast. So as ever, please do like this particular video, do subscribe as Stephen said before, but also stick in any comments down here in terms of the things that you would like to see in the future, or the things that you believe we should be doing better or otherwise. Always very helpful.
Thanks very much, and we'll see you again on the next episode. Bye. You've been listening to Talking Conservation,
the podcast all about conservation of old, traditional and historic buildings and sites.
With me, Stephen Boniface.
And me, Rich Aylesbury.